Every great empire in history believed it was different. Spain believed it would dominate forever. Britain believed its empire would never decline. The Soviet Union believed collapse was impossible, but they all followed a pattern, not a random collapse, but a structured sequence. And that sequence repeated across centuries. This is what Ray Dalio calls the seven-stage empire cycle, a framework that explains how nations rise, peak, and eventually decline. And the most unsettling part is how consistent it is. It doesn't matter which country you study, the pattern shows up again and again. Different cultures, different systems, same trajectory. Because the collapse is not sudden. It builds slowly over time, and most people don't notice it until it's too late. Stage one begins with a rise. A country builds strong institutions. Education improves, productivity increases, and innovation accelerates. Wealth grows rapidly during this phase. The nation becomes competitive globally. Confidence starts building. Stage two is expansion. Economic success leads to global influence. Trade increases, and the country begins shaping international systems. Its currency becomes important. Its markets attract capital. Its power extends beyond its borders. Stage three is the peak. This is where everything looks strongest. Wealth is high, influence is dominant, and confidence turns into certainty. But this is also where the seeds of decline are planted. Because success changes behavior, and behavior changes systems. Stage four is excess. Debt begins rising. Spending increases beyond sustainable levels. Easy money creates bubbles, asset prices inflate, and inequality starts widening. This stage feels like prosperity, but it is built on fragile foundations. Because growth is no longer driven by productivity, it is driven by leverage. Borrowing replaces real expansion, and that creates long-term risk. Stage five is where things start to change. Not collapse yet, but visible stress. The system begins to show cracks. Debt levels become heavy. Interest payments rise. Economic growth slows down. Inequality becomes more obvious. Social divisions increase. Political conflict intensifies. This is where many analysts believe the United States is today. Not collapsing, but under pressure. A system that is still strong, but increasingly strained. History shows this stage clearly. Spain experienced it before losing dominance. Britain faced it before its empire declined. The Soviet Union reached this stage before its collapse. Each time the pattern looked similar. Economic stress increases first, then political divisions follow, and eventually confidence begins to weaken. Confidence is critical. Because economies run on belief. If people believe the system works, it continues. But when belief weakens, behavior changes, investment slows, risk increases. This is why stage five is so important. It is the turning point. Not guaranteed collapse, but rising probability. At this stage, governments face difficult decisions. Continue spending and increase debt, or tighten policy and risk slowing growth. Neither option is easy. Both carry consequences. And both can accelerate the next stage. Another sign of stage five is internal conflict. Political polarization increases. Consensus becomes harder to reach. Different groups begin pulling in different directions, and that makes coordinated action difficult. Economic stress feeds this division. Rising costs affect daily life, and that frustration becomes political. This creates a feedback loop. Economic pressure leads to political conflict. Political conflict makes economic solutions harder. At the same time, global competition increases. Other nations rise. New powers challenge existing dominance. This shifts the balance. Influence becomes contested, and maintaining leadership becomes harder. Currency strength also becomes a factor. Reserve currencies rely on trust, and trust depends on stability. If stability weakens, alternatives emerge, slowly at first, but momentum builds over time. This is how global systems evolve, not through sudden change, but gradual shifts, and those shifts redefine power. Stage five is where these shifts begin to accelerate. The system is still functioning, but the direction is changing. This is why it feels confusing. Because strength and weakness exist at the same time. Growth continues, but pressure builds. Markets may remain strong. Innovation may continue, but underlying risks increase. Debt is one of the clearest signals. High debt limits flexibility. It reduces the ability to respond to crises. Interest payments grow larger. Budgets become constrained, and choices become more difficult. This is where policy mistakes become dangerous, because the margin for error is smaller, and the impact of mistakes is larger. History shows that stage five does not guarantee collapse, but it increases the risk significantly, and the next stage depends on decisions made here. Because this is the moment where direction is decided. Stabilization or further decline, adjustment or escalation. And that is what makes this stage so critical. Not what has already happened, but what happens next. Because once a system moves beyond this point, the next stages become much harder to control. If stage five is pressure building, the next stage is where that pressure starts breaking things. Not all at once, but in visible ways. This is where cracks turn into fractures. Stage 6 is decline becoming obvious. Economic growth slows significantly. Financial systems begin showing stress. Debt is no longer manageable quietly. Interest costs rise faster than revenue. Governments begin struggling to balance priorities. At this point, choices become more extreme. Either cut spending and risk recession, or increase borrowing and deepen long-term risk. Neither path is stable. Both carry consequences, and both accelerate instability in different ways. Financial markets start reacting more violently. Volatility increases. Confidence becomes fragile. Small events trigger large reactions. Because the system is already under pressure, and pressure amplifies everything. Banking systems often feel this stage first. Liquidity becomes tighter. Lending slows down. When lending slows, growth slows further. Businesses delay expansion. Consumers reduce spending. This creates a downward cycle. Slower growth leads to lower confidence. Lower confidence reduces activity. At the same time, political systems become more unstable. Division increases significantly. Cooperation becomes difficult. Policies become harder to pass. Governments struggle to respond effectively. And delays make problems worse. This is where internal conflict intensifies. Not necessarily violence, but deep division. Different groups push in opposite directions. That division weakens decision-making. It slows response time. And it reduces the ability to adapt. Another key factor is currency pressure. Reserve currencies depend on trust, and trust begins to weaken in this stage. Other countries begin exploring alternatives, not replacing immediately, but diversifying slowly, and that shift matters over time. As demand for the currency weakens, borrowing becomes harder. Interest rates may rise further, and that increases pressure. This creates a feedback loop. Economic stress weakens confidence. Weak confidence increases economic stress. External competition also increases during this stage. Other nations rise in influence. They take advantage of instability. Global power shifts gradually, not through one event, but through many small changes, each one reducing dominance slightly. This is where history becomes clear. Spain experienced this stage before losing global power. Britain faced it before its empire declined. The Soviet Union reached this stage before collapse. Each time, the pattern looked different on the surface, but the structure was the same. Economic pressure, political division, and external competition, all happening at the same time, all reinforcing each other. This stage feels unstable, not completely broken, but clearly weakening, and that uncertainty drives behavior. Investors become more cautious. Capital moves differently. Risk-taking declines. Markets may still function, but they become more sensitive. And sensitivity increases volatility. This is also where policy responses become critical. Governments try to stabilize the system, but their options are limited. Stimulus may provide short-term relief, but it can increase long-term debt. Tightening may control inflation, but slow growth. Every solution creates another problem, and that makes decision-making extremely difficult. There is no perfect answer. At this point, timing becomes everything. Acting too early can damage growth. Acting too late can worsen the crisis. This is why stage 6 is so unstable. It is not just decline, it is uncertainty about how to respond to decline. The system is still functioning, but it is no longer stable. And instability changes behavior. People become more defensive, institutions become more cautious, and risk tolerance drops. This slows innovation, it slows investment, and it slows recovery. Meanwhile, external pressures continue building. Competitors grow stronger, alternatives become more attractive. This gradually shifts global influence, not suddenly, but consistently. And consistency matters more than speed. Eventually, the system reaches a tipping point, not necessarily a collapse, but a breaking moment, a point where pressure becomes too much. This leads to stage 7, the final phase of the cycle, the resolution phase. This stage can take different forms. Sometimes it is a financial crisis. Sometimes it is political restructuring. In extreme cases, it becomes social unrest. In rare cases, it leads to conflict, but it always involves major change because the system can no longer continue as it is. It must reset, and resets are disruptive. Debt may be restructured. Institutions may change. Power structures may shift. This is how new cycles begin, through disruption and adjustment, through decline and rebuilding. But the key insight is this: the collapse is not random. It follows a pattern. And that pattern repeats because human behavior repeats. Decisions under pressure tend to follow similar paths. Right now, the United States is not in collapse, but it is in a critical phase, a phase where pressure is building. The direction from here depends on decisions, not just economic, but political and strategic. Because stage 5 and stage 6 are connected. One leads into the other, and the transition can be gradual or sudden. That is why this moment matters, not because collapse is certain, but because risk is increasing. History does not guarantee outcomes, but it provides patterns, and patterns help us understand direction. The real question is not whether history repeats. It is how closely current events follow the same structure, because if the pattern continues, the next stage will not be a surprise.